Howdy my totally, as always, Tubular Gamers. We're back with, you guessed it, another video. And today's video, it's gonna be a fun one. We're gonna be talking about the Nintendo GameCube, my favorite shape-based console. I love the GameCube to death. We're gonna be talking about the 10 hardest games for the GameCube. Oh yeah.
And who doesn't love the GameCube? The GameCube had so many fantastic games that still hold up incredibly well nowadays, but we're really not talking about the best here, we're talking about the hardest. The GameCube actually had a pretty decent library when it comes to difficult games, and it's actually home to some of the hardest games of all time. Now, there's a lot of GameCube games. I haven't played every single GameCube game. I sure have played a lot of them, but not all of them, and so this is just the 10 hardest games that I've played. In my experiences, these are the 10 most difficult games for the GameCube. As usual with my hardest games list, I'm not looking at like, oh, if you play the game on the hardest difficulty, it becomes very hard, or oh, if you go full completionist mode outside of Charity Fraud, it's actually a really hard game. I'm looking at just playing through the game normally, what the average everyday player is going to experience, playing on the normal difficulty and just going through the game, not getting every single collectible or doing everything. And as always, difficulty is totally subjective. What I find super difficult, you might not find anywhere near as difficult, so let me know down below how you feel about the list, these games, or if you think I should have included something else.
And hey, please like, share, comment, subscribe. Any support really does help out the channel. I mean it. Seriously, thank you. If you even made it to this part of the video, you're great.
Alright, so kicking things off in the number 10 spot, we have Alien Hominid. Yeah, do you remember this game? Originally starting as a Flash game, it got released on the GameCube in 2004 and immediately became one of the Cube's hardest games. And if the game's art style looks a little familiar, it's because this game was developed by the behemoth who would go on to make Castle Crashers and Battle Block Theater, which are great games, but we're talking about Alien Hominid today, which is a throwback run and gun shooter in the vein to games like Metal Slug. I would say Metal Slug is probably the best comparison I could make for this game, and like Metal Slug, this game is challenging, only unlike Metal Slug, this is not an arcade game you pump quarters into to respawn. It's a home console game where you're just gonna die a decent amount. Pretty much everything can kill your alien. You've got your little blaster, you can throw grenades, there's a melee attack, there's a few advanced moves like rolling or biting people's heads off, but your arsenal really isn't that big. You do get power-ups like Metal Slug and Contra, and these help a little bit, but you're gonna be blasting just about everything on screen. And you'll quickly get just absolutely swarmed by enemies where they're taking up the entire screen, and yeah, you just got to take them out. The game is pretty simple. It's just kill everything and move to the right. There's some boss fights, and the level design isn't anything complex at all. You just got to be paying constant attention, trying not to get hit, lose all your lives, and take everything out. Sometimes it's the simplest games that are the most difficult. This is absolutely one of those games where, despite its fun art style and silly kooky premise and its good sense of humor, it's actually a pretty challenging game. I remember playing this game long ago going, oh, look at the fun little alien, and you just kill things, and then after playing it I was like, wait, why is this game so hard? I just keep dying over and over, and coming back to it all these years later I'm like, yeah, this game's actually pretty challenging. It's a little more challenging than I remember, and at times it feels like it can get pretty punishing, especially towards the end of the game where you just go through these absolute gauntlets and you need to not lose all of your lives. While there are 16 levels, these aren't the longest or most complex levels by any means, but you'll still probably go through them a few times because you'll just keep dying over and over, or you're super raw at the game and you just don't die at all. But that's absolutely not me. I saw these levels plenty of times. At least there's some fun vehicles where you get to go in like a UFO and wipe everybody out. There's even like a Yeti, that's cool. And even with the game's high challenge, it still is a fun time that is totally worth checking out if you like this style of game. If you like run and gun games and have not tried Alien Hominid, I really think you should. It's been re-released several times now, and just last year in 2023 it actually did get a sequel, Alien Hominid Invasion. I have yet to try that, but one day I certainly will. And that's because this original game is a total classic, and it really is one of the greatest things to ever come from Newgrounds.com. And so for our next game, we actually have a Resident Evil game. We have Resident Evil 0. Now, over the years, it feels like most people have forgotten about Resident Evil 0. And I feel like I just don't hear all that many people talk about it anymore. Maybe it's due to the game's quality, which in my opinion isn't that great, or just how generally forgettable the game is outside of the train at the beginning, and it's easy to forget that Resident Evil 0 is actually one of the harder Resident Evil games. I went back and played the game last year to review and rank every Resident Evil game, and I was kind of surprised with just how difficult this game was. I also found it a lot more annoying and the balancing kind of whack, but when it came to the difficulty, yeah, this game wasn't really messing around. When it comes to the gameplay, it plays just like the older Resident Evil games with the fixed camera angles. You can have tank controls if you want, there's a bunch of scares, you'll get into combat with zombies and other monsters, there's the survival elements where you have to manage your inventory, and of course plenty of puzzles. It's not the gameplay structure that really makes this game difficult, it's the puzzles, the survival elements, the inventory management, and some of the combat that makes this game difficult, in my opinion at least. I don't think the combat is crazy difficult, there's a decent amount of it here, but you can totally get the hang of it, and if you've played any other survival horror game, I think you're going to be just fine. Some of the bosses can give you a run for your money though. I think it's really everything else that makes the game challenging, the inventory management, and especially the puzzles. The puzzles are not messing around in this game. I was scratching my head so many times. Oftentimes, they take advantage of Resident Evil Zero's gimmick where there's two characters that you're controlling at once. You can switch between them when they're not together, but you very much do have to worry about both of them. And yeah, the puzzles absolutely take this mechanic to the fullest where you're giving items to the other character. You'll have one character do something that will affect where the other character is, and there's a lot of back and forth. And speaking of back and forth, yeah, that's what the inventory and item management is in this game. There's no inventory boxes. Yeah, there's just straight up no box, so when you're managing your small inventory, and it, you know, gets full, and then you come across an item that you absolutely need to progress, you're going to have to drop something, and then you're also going to have to remember where you drop it also. And this creates just a lot of tedious back and forth. This is more annoying than difficult, but it certainly adds to the game's challenge. Especially if you're not killing every single enemy and you're just running past them. Now you have more margin for error because you have to keep going back to get items. And all of this could have totally been avoided if they just had a box, but they don't, and the item management and survival elements are a bit difficult because of that. And naturally, the further you get in the game, the more challenging it becomes. You go to bigger and bigger areas with more items and puzzles to solve, and there's just a lot more complexity. I wouldn't say this is like one of the hardest survival horror games of all time, but it is challenging. It's definitely one of the hardest Resident Evil games. I'd say the hardest is still Code Veronica, which funny enough is on the GameCube, but I've never touched the GameCube version of the game, so I don't have it on the list. I always stuck to the Dreamcast or the PS2 version. Anyway, RE0, it's a challenging survival horror game, and while it's not one of the best Resident Evils, it'll at least give you a run for your money. Well, hey, RE0 isn't the only horror game on this list. We actually also have Eternal Darkness, the survival horror classic published by Nintendo. This game is a total cult classic and many people love it, but it's pretty easy to forget that this is actually a relatively challenging game. I'd say it's one of the harder survival horror games, especially for the era. While I wouldn't say it's the most challenging when it comes to like reflexes or the combat, that's all pretty standard for a survival horror game. This game is much more difficult when it comes to the survival elements and the puzzles. The survival elements aren't anything special for the genre, you just gotta manage your resources and inventory. It's just, yeah, this game makes you get a bit stingy with everything, and it's a welcome change. So many survival games honestly give you so much stuff. This game, no, it doesn't give you a ton to work with. On top of this, the game is constantly messing with you as you play through it. It's kind of what this game is known for, where like it just randomly turns the screen off or deletes your save. It just finds ways to mess with you, and that certainly adds to the challenge. But then there's the puzzles. The puzzles in this game are no joke. These are really some of the most difficult puzzles of like any survival horror game from this era. I remember when I was a teenager, I was just perplexed on these puzzles. Like, I had zero idea on how the hell to get through these, and even with a walkthrough, it still doesn't make a ton of sense. The puzzles alone get it on this list, but I'd say the puzzles really do add to the challenge here. Like, this game's whole magic system is actually relatively complex. There's a lot more going on here than meets the eye, and it actually can even lead to some dynamic puzzle solving where you can figure things out in unintended ways, and that's actually really cool. But you got to be very creative to figure that out and understand all of the game's systems. I guess, yeah, as a teenager, I just wasn't really capable of that kind of critical thought. I don't know. I was a growing boy, maybe I wasn't getting enough of my Flintstone vitamins. I mean, I'm probably still not getting enough of my Flintstone vitamins. Those things tasted like ass. It was like chalk out here. Shit was dry, flaky, and I'd rather have almost any other type of vitamin or gummy or whatever those were. I'm getting off track here. Eternal Darkness is a challenging game, even for survival horror veterans. There's a lot going on here. The game constantly messes with you, while the combat is not stupidly difficult or going to really test you all that much. The puzzles certainly will make you stop and think, and it's probably why you're going to take as long as you're going to take completing this game. Still, it's an absolute classic, and there's a reason so many people love it to this day. I mean, it's a great game, and it's really an underrated survival horror game. Not like super underrated like the game Obscure or its sequel, but it's relatively underrated and it should be tried out. And so here we have Need for Speed Underground 1. Now when it comes to the Need for Speed series, it's pretty consistent with its difficulty. Rather consistent with one exception, that exception being Need for Speed Underground 1. Underground 2 is tricky as well, but I really think the first game is the harder of the two. Something else this series is rather consistent with is rubber banding AI. From that original game, the Need for Speed, all the way to Need for Speed Unbound, you will find rubber banding AI where they just magically catch up to you, but none of them have it worse than Underground 1. This is the worst rubber banding AI of the entire series, and some of the worst I've ever seen in a video game. And it's pretty much for this alone that the difficulty is so high. There's also traffic that randomly spawns around your car, and usually it's just in the worst imaginable spot and you'll just crash right into it because they give you like less than a second, it feels like, to react to it. The traffic's really annoying, but it's the rubber banding AI that makes this game so hard. It doesn't start out crazy difficult, no, not at all. It is towards the end of the game, the last like 10 missions, where the game just gets absolutely ridiculous. The AI are just blatantly cheating. You can get super far ahead of them, they'll somehow catch you. And likely they'll pass you. You have to do these very long races towards the end of the game. We're talking like 6 to 10 minutes, and if you're in the last 30 seconds and you crash or a car passes you, it pretty much is over. I mean, it feels like you will never win by more than just a few seconds, especially towards the end of the game. Like, I had these tracks so memorized, I could do these straight up perfect runs, but in the last like 20 seconds, I do a little bump or I go over a jump wrong, or my favorite, when the traffic shows up and the whole thing's gone. The race is over, I just wasted 10 minutes. Like, talk about frustrating. I rarely lose my shit nowadays when I'm playing a game, especially as I've gotten older. I just put the game down and play something else. But this is one game I actually lost my shit with. I spent over an hour on some of these missions because it's just that ridiculous with the rubber banding. These nearly perfect runs being ruined in the last like 40 seconds because of something stupid. And I'm just like, it shouldn't be this difficult. Not at all. And so then I actually tried putting the game on easy. There's an easy, normal, hard, and it didn't do a damn thing. It was still just as hard as it was before. It feels like the difficulty change meant absolutely nothing. I could not find any way that this was actually easier. Like, why does this even exist? It didn't seem to do anything. And I've heard some people say, oh, you're just really bad at racing games, this isn't hard. Well, to that I say, I really challenge you to go back and try those last few missions of Underground 1. It just gets absolutely ridiculous. It is way harder than it should be, and it's thanks to this that I would say Need for Speed Underground legit is the hardest of the whole Need for Speed series, and it's one of the hardest racing games I've ever played. Like, gosh dang it, this game made me blow a gasket. I was getting so mad at it, and you know what, just thinking about it, I'm already starting to get heated, so I'm just going to move on to the next game. Underground, it's a tough game, and it's not fair. And here's a game that's been a thorn in my side pretty much my entire life, and that's Super Mario Sunshine. Now, I love Super Mario Sunshine. It really is one of my favorite Mario games of all time. The aesthetic, the gameplay, the levels, the music, I'm incredibly nostalgic for this game, but one thing that I will always remember this game is difficult. Super Mario Sunshine is one of the hardest Mario games of them all, and I'm not talking about 100%ing, I'm talking about just beating the game at all. It really is one of the toughest Mario games. Outside of the Lost Levels, I really can't think of a Mario game that's harder than Mario Sunshine. And it's not for one reason in particular, it's just that a lot of Shine sprites are actually quite challenging. Some of the worst ones can be avoided as they are optional, stuff like the pachinko machine or the river that kills you, but there are plenty of Shine sprites that are required to beat the game. But when I think about the hardest parts of this game, oh, that's easy. It's when they take Flood from you. When they take Flood from you and you have to go through these platforming challenges, the game shows its true colors, and you better be prepared to see some game over screens. Now, with FLUDD, the controls are fantastic in this game, but without it, you realize just how slippery and imprecise Mario is. FLUDD always does all the course correcting for you, so when you don't have it, yeah, you're gonna slip and slide all over the place, and it just never felt like I had a great handle on Mario during these sections. I mean, all these years later, it still doesn't feel nice. Like, I just played this game like a month ago, and I'm like, yep, all these years later, I still just don't feel like I have a great grasp on Mario without FLUDD. And while he has a great moveset and the spin jump is great, they took the long jump, his most powerful move. You could really use it in this game. But seriously, the parts where you don't have FLUDD, these are like the hardest parts of the game that you have to do. And don't even get me started on that challenge where you got to get thrown by the chucksters. I hate this. Hate this so much. This is just such an awful level. The chucksters don't ever throw you perfectly in the direction how you want them, and oftentimes they just throw you right off the cliff. No, I hate this so much. They just piss me the hell off, and I don't want to talk about them. There are other missions, though, that are pretty difficult in this game, like where you got to take out the giant manta ray, or the village is on fire. Doing the races on the bloopers, or the freaking sandbird. Man, the sandbird always gave me so much trouble when I was younger. There's a lot of difficult shine sprites here. Man, that voice crack gonna make me lose subscribers, but seriously, the sandbird, that was a really tough one. This game just has some of the most difficult collectibles of any Mario game, and if you want 100% this game, man, this game goes from hard to like stupidly hard. This is one of the hardest games to 100% ever, legit ever, with the blue coins, the stupid watermelon mission, some really awful shine sprites like the pachinko machine. This game just becomes like absurdly difficult, but I'm not including 100% on here, otherwise this game would be much higher on the list. Just to beat the game, it's challenging, but not impossible. I've done it, and you can too. I believe in you. So here's an absolute classic, but you've probably never heard of it. It's a little game called Super Smash Bros. Melee. I don't know if you're too familiar with it, but this little hidden gem is actually really difficult. While it is a beloved fighting game that was in the major competitive scene for a very long time, I think a lot of people forget just how challenging the single player actually is. I mean, most people were playing the multiplayer, myself included, but when I was by myself, I played the single player content, and I actually love the single player content of Melee. There's the classic mode, adventure mode, all-star, the challenges like 100-man Melee, and then there's the events. Oh, the events are really where this game gets challenging. I don't think classic, adventure, all-star, or any of those are really all that difficult on the normal difficulty. I mean, on the harder difficulties, this game can absolutely wipe the floor with you, but on the normal difficulty, yeah, I wouldn't really say it's much of a challenge. The events, though, yeah, the events are where this game actually gets rather difficult. They don't start out difficult, not at all, and you probably won't have all that much challenge with them. It's like the midway point and then the last few where the game just shoots up with its difficulty. Like, I remember when I was younger, it took me forever to beat some of these events. My parents would only let me play for like an hour a day, and I feel like I'd spend the whole hour just trying to do one event, like when you have to fight Dark Link or any of the trophy tussles, especially the one with the big Majora's Mask. I feel like I was on this one forever. Like, the AI in some of these can be absolutely ruthless. They could just straight up dominate you, like destroy you, trap you in the corner, combo the crap out of you. If you're fighting more than one AI, oftentimes they'll just straight up team up on you. Like, it does get tough. I remember struggling with plenty of events because the character they make you play as is someone that I'm not particularly all that good with, and that's obviously a personalized skill issue, but that's something you got to contend with in this game. And then there's like the final event where you have to fight Ganondorf, you have to fight Giga Bowser, and Mewtwo, and this, oh my god, man, this took me forever when I was younger, and even nowadays I'm just like, this is actually really challenging. These three characters will just absolutely destroy you, like straight up. They will destroy you very quickly. In under 5 seconds they can destroy you. You have to pretty much use Jigglypuff in rest, or you have to just be really good. The game actually really does test you here, and I don't know if it was supposed to be this difficult, but it certainly is. That last event is really what comes to mind when I think of difficult events in this game. I remember being on this for seemingly months until I finally did beat it. And coming back to Melee all these years later, especially after playing a bunch of Ultimate, you know, you realize Melee is a bit stiff, but it's also challenging, and I feel like Ultimate is nowhere near as challenging as this game is, even on the hardest difficulty. And while this entry could totally just be a skill issue, I think most people struggled with a lot of these events and could agree that they are at the very least challenging, especially the frickin' Majora's Mask Trophy Tussle. I'm never gonna let that one go. I think we can all agree though. Screw Rainbow Cruise, that map has always been some kind of ass. Oh, and that Melee is still a classic all these years later that should be tried by everybody that can breathe. And so here we have a game I don't talk about nearly enough, and that is Viewtiful Joe. Now, I remember getting Viewtiful Joe as a teenager and just being wowed by the game's presentation, the story, and the gameplay mechanics. I thought it was really awesome, and then I played a few hours of this game, and then a few more hours, and I quickly realized that this is actually a pretty challenging game. It's got that old school difficulty, and the game really demands you to master its mechanics. You have to completely understand and utilize them to the fullest if you want to beat this game, because some of the combat encounters get rather difficult. There's a few bosses in this game that can just absolutely wipe the floor with you. Shoot, if you get ganged up on enemies, they can wipe the floor with you. It starts out simple enough. You fight some really basic enemies, you're learning the mechanics, you're learning how Joe can do all of his flashy moves where you speed things up or you slow things down and do those mega punches, but the enemies, they seriously can pack a punch on you too, and they can actually kill you surprisingly quickly. Some enemies just hit like an absolute truck, and this is just on the normal difficulty. On the harder difficulties, oh yeah, they can wipe you out real fast. You'll need good timing, decent reflexes, and really just an understanding of the game's mechanics through and through. And then when the bosses show up, oh yeah, things aren't messing around. This game has some really difficult bosses to it, especially in the second half, and the game does get rather challenging. Sometimes even surprisingly so. I never thought the second game was this hard, but you also had Sylvia who had the gun. Then again, this is Capcom, you know, they made Ghosts and Goblins. This game, obviously, it's nowhere near as difficult as that. I was able to actually, you know, finish it as a teenager versus Ghosts and Goblins. But there certainly was a decent amount of trial and error for me here, especially with the enemies that hit like a freaking truck. They could just stop you in your tracks. And then in these levels, there actually is a little bit of platforming and avoiding some traps, and these can get kind of hairy as well. They at the very least add to the difficulty, and they can be pretty annoying. There's also some puzzles that show up here, and the puzzles are not as straightforward as you would think. They utilize the game's mechanics, and they can be kind of a pain in the ass, to be honest. It's like I just want to get on to the next fight or the next cool set piece or boss fight, and it's like they're making me do this little puzzle, and the puzzle is actually kind of annoying, and I have to do this thing called critical thinking, which is not something I'm ready to do for Viewtiful Joe. So yeah, the puzzles I guess challenge me a little bit, and all of this really does come together to be one of the most difficult GameCube games in my opinion. I'm not going to act like it's impossible or anything near that. Once you master the game's mechanics, you understand enemy patterns, you know what to do for these puzzles, you can absolutely demolish this game. You can become stupid good. The game is incredibly replayable. There's tons of different characters and difficulty modes, and it's a fantastic game overall. It very well might be like the best beat 'em up ever, no hyperbole, but it's not going to be a breeze down easy street. No, no, no. This game, it doesn't play like that. It doesn't swing that way. Okay, so in the number 3 spot, I got a double header for you. I have Super Monkey Ball 1 and 2. Now, I've been playing the Monkey Ball games for a very long time now, and something they've always done is challenge me. I remember getting Super Monkey Ball 2 as a kid and absolutely hating the game because of how difficult it was. I actually ended up getting rid of it, but I got it back as a teenager, and now it's one of my favorite games of all time. And then I went and got the original and fully expected it to be just as hard as the second game, and yeah, it really is just as hard as the second game. I'd say they're pretty equal when it comes to the difficulty. For Monkey Ball 1, there's the 3 different playlists, I guess, of stages. There's beginner, advanced, and expert, and while beginner really won't give you much trouble, and advanced, yeah, it does have some difficult stages, it's really expert where this game just becomes absolutely ruthless. They want you to go through so many courses with very few lives, and these are some of the most difficult courses of any Monkey Ball game. Seriously, these get hella hard. And then somehow, if you have the power of God and anime on your side and you don't get a game over, you get even more stages, bonus stages that are also stupidly difficult. And you might be wondering what makes this game so hard, what makes these courses so hard? Are the physics just that bad? Are the controls that whack? No, the physics are great, the controls are great, the handling is really solid. It's that they make you go up against some really difficult obstacles where you have to master the game's physics and controls. And I'll just say, you really have to be one with the monkey. You need to go full Planet of the Apes on this shit in order to get past some of these obstacle courses where you need incredible precision, timing, a sense of speed since you're on a timer, and again, just complete mastery of the game's physics in order to make the ball go exactly where you need it to go so then you can get through the goal. It really isn't a difficult premise. Get monkey to end of goal. It's just they throw some really challenging obstacles in your way. and these courses really take full advantage of the game's physics since, you know, they were built around it. When it comes to the second game, there's actually a story mode. Now, the first few worlds of the story mode won't give you much trouble. It's really like the midway point, and then of course the last few worlds that, yeah, you're just going to be trying these stages over and over. There's a decent amount of trial and error here. A lot of these stages get very challenging, especially at the end of the game, where sometimes I would spend damn near 10 minutes on one stage. Like, Monkey Ball 2 really isn't any easier than the first game. It even has its own playlists, and yeah, these are just as hard as the first games. Like, these playlists are just absolute gauntlets. Like, the advanced and expert playlists want you to go through 30, 50 stages with only a handful of lives. Sure, you can get more as you play through the game, but you never have just an overwhelming number of lives here. And some of these stages, man, some of these stages are so hard. Like in the second game where you have to get launched into the air and land on the goalpost, or really just any of the space stages, like, you're gonna die several times before you're able to get through it for the first time. Now, Monkey Ball 1 and 2 were actually re-released on the original Xbox and PS2 as Monkey Ball Deluxe, and this is a totally legit way to play both of these games. Physics are intact, all the stages are. This is good. Then there was the remake known as Banana Mania, and this is okay. It changes the physics and it kind of messes with the stages, and the mini games aren't as good, and I don't think this is as challenging as the original game, just kind of due to the physics being different and having a different feel to it. Like, it still is challenging, but it doesn't compare to those GameCube originals. Both of these games, yeah, you're probably going to want to rip your hair out at some point, but they're fantastic games. They're some of my favorite games of all time, and I really do love them to death, even when I'm screaming at them. Okay, now we're getting to the real hard stuff. Everything before was like a beer, maybe a vodka. Here we're at a Fireball, spiced rum, Captain Morgan. We're really not messing around with Ikaruga. Now, I am not the biggest shmup guy. I don't play a ton of shoot 'em ups, but I have played Ikaruga, and I think it's an absolutely fantastic game. It's probably my favorite shmup of them all. Like, I've actually played quite a lot of this game, and the reason I played quite a lot of it is because it's so difficult and I've had to replay stages so damn much. So Ikaruga is a bullet hell where you have to dodge just a ton of projectiles on screen, but it also has this really fascinating mechanic where you switch between a white and black ship at the press of a button. When you're the white ship, you can absorb white projectiles, and when you're the black ship, you can absorb the black projectiles. If you're black and you hit a white projectile though, you die, and vice versa of course. However, if you're, say, the white ship and you start shooting a black enemy, you'll actually do double damage. If you're the black ship and you're shooting the black enemy, you only do half damage, and so it really creates this risk versus reward where you're constantly switching between the two colors, trying to dodge everything, absorb the same color of light, and of course be the opposite color to the enemy that you're shooting in order to defeat it faster. And then there is just a truckload of obstacles you have to dodge on top of this. So this game has around 5 or 6 stages, and its runtime is only around 30 minutes, and so you might be thinking, really, it's only like a 30-minute game? It can't be that hard then. Well, the first stage, yeah, it's not too hard at all. It's easing you into things, you're getting used to it. You might die once or twice, but no big deal. It's the second stage and on where this game shows its true colors, and its true colors are, hey, you might be enjoying this game. We're going to show you now that this is one of the hardest video games ever made. No exaggeration. Like, this game gets absolutely crazy with its difficulty. You have to dodge so much stuff on screen that it's not even funny. You're constantly bombarded by enemies, obstacles, bosses show up and they just shoot everything imaginable at you. It's very common in this game where there are more projectiles on screen than free space, where you literally cannot see like anything but projectiles. Like, this game goes beyond trial and error. You have to just know basically every second of all of these stages outside of the first stage. Like, every single part of the stage is going to challenge you. All of these stages are absolute gauntlets. That 30 minutes, only 30 minutes, no, that is 30 minutes of hell. This shit gets hard. When I was a teenager, I never actually got past the second stage. Like, I really did like the game, I liked the music and the mechanics, but I just could never beat the second stage. It was only when I got a bit older that I was able to get to the third stage, the fourth stage, saw the fifth stage, and even as you're getting way better at the game, you're getting better with your timing, you're being able to just notice things that you didn't before. It's not like the game's getting any easier. No, it really isn't. The game just becomes brutally difficult. Like, I have not had a shmup challenge me as much much as this game. I've played like all the Toho games, and none of the Touhou games ever challenged me as much as Ikaruga did. Now, Ikaruga was a classic on the GameCube. People absolutely loved it and its difficulty, and eventually it was re-released. And this re-release is probably the definitive way to play the game, with extra difficulty modes and some little bonuses thrown in here or there, and it's relatively cheap as opposed to the GameCube game, which is not. This game is actually a Dreamcast game, but the Dreamcast game never left Japan. So if you played this game on the GameCube, you're an OG, you know what's up, you know how difficult this game gets. And it's crazy to me how all these years later, there really isn't another game like Ikaruga. I mean, I could be totally wrong. I don't play many shmups, let alone modern shmups. And so maybe there is a game that lifts Ikaruga's mechanics and it's like the spiritual successor. But to my understanding, no, there's really not another game like Ikaruga. And you know, that's okay. This game is just wildly difficult. And it really is one of the hardest GameCube games of them all. Really, there's only one GameCube game that I think is harder than Ikaruga, and that's F-Zero GX. F-Zero GX is, no exaggeration, one of the very hardest games ever made, and is probably the hardest racing game of them all. Now, the F-Zero series has never been easy. F-Zero on Super Nintendo is hard, F-Zero X is maybe the hardest N64 game of them all, and then F-Zero GX, well, this game is just absolutely ruthless. Like, this game almost makes the other F-Zero games look easy by comparison. Like, I remember getting this game as a young teenager, more like a tween, and being like, oh, I love Captain Falcon in Super Smash Bros. I've always wanted to try his game, and just being absolutely shocked with how hard this game was. I went, wait a second, why is this game so hard? Where's like the easy setting? No, there ain't no easy setting. I remember trying to play through this story mode and just being straight up gobsmacked with how hard it was. And then I went on the family computer and just looked up F-Zero GX hard, only to find out that yes, this really is one of the hardest video games ever made. But I was persistent, I sat through it, and somehow as a young teenager I was able to get through the entire story mode, and this story mode is no joke. There's around 9 missions in this game, and the first mission, yeah, it's not really hard at all. The second mission, yeah, I remember having to retry it a few times. It's the third mission where things get real. That is where the game absolutely is like, okay, we had fun playing with you. We're just gonna absolutely destroy you and ruin your day. Like, this race is so freaking difficult. The other hovercrafts are just stupid fast. They perform perfectly on this track, know exactly where to go, know the shortcuts, know when to boost. Like, beating this third stage alone requires mastery of the controls, the vehicle, the stage, boosting. Like, you need to really understand the game's mechanics to the fullest for the third level. Like, this race is really going to put some hair on your chest, and if you get past it, the game does not get any easier. There are several difficult missions here, like the one where you have the stupid bomb on your car and you can't slow down. I just have straight up nightmares about this course because I did it so many times. You have to go through like this little obstacle course, and it's a straight up gauntlet. You got to go like 4 or 5 minutes, and you can't slow down, you can't bump anything, and yeah, it's pretty hard. I remember in the second half of the game, there's a 30-man race, and the AI are just stupid good. They understand the track, again, when to boost, and they're just so much faster than you. I remember the only way I won this race is by taking out the top like 3 people, because you can actually attack them and take them out, and when I took them out, I remember I was just like, holy shit, I actually did it. And yeah, I was able to win the race when I actually took them out, and I don't think I've ever actually beaten this race without taking out the top few racers. I remember shortly after, you have a one-on-one race with the game's main antagonist. This was really difficult, and then you have the final race where you race on this literal rainbow road where there are no barriers whatsoever. There is nothing stopping you from just driving right off the side of the course and dying and having to restart. You race basically a time trial, and the time trial, man, that shit is hella fast. I remember being stuck on this for hours and hours, just coming home from school and playing this for like 4 hours. And I want to say I did it 2 or 3 days. Like, yeah, I was really stumped by this one. But then I remember doing it. Somehow I was able to actually beat F-Zero GX's story mode. And then you unlock the hard difficulty. And I said, yeah, no way in hell, that's not happening. And the difficulty doesn't end there. Most people just talk about F-Zero GX's story mode when they're talking about the difficulty. Have you actually tried the Grand Prix mode? The Grand Prix mode is no joke either. That starts out simple enough, but the second half of the Grand Prix mode, some of the harder cups, like, this shit is just as hard as the story mode. The AI are just crazy crazy fast, incredibly responsive. They know when to boost, they know the tracks by heart. I mean, they're basically just cheating. They're AI, but these tracks are no joke. You go through some really tough courses, especially whenever that pipe course shows up. There's several pipes in this game, and man, these are actually way harder than you would expect, and it is quite easy to just fly off the pipe and lose the race entirely. The Grand Prix mode, I never finished as a teenager. It was only when I came back later that I was able to actually beat it. But I also think at this point my spirit was just broken by that story mode, and I just didn't want to play the game anymore. It wasn't until, yeah, that I was older and had more experience with racing games and futuristic racing games that I was able to get anywhere in the Grand Prix mode. But completing those story missions on hard, yeah, that still has never happened. I'm never going to get to play as those extra characters the legit way because I just can't beat the story mode on the harder difficulty. Like, this game was already hard enough. Why they got to do this to me? I just wanted to play as the crazy taxi guy PJ, but no, you gotta beat one of the hardest missions in the game on the hard difficulty. So I broke out the action replay. That was the only way I had the characters, because I wanted to play something else and do something else with my time. You can also bring your memory card to an AX machine and download them through that, but I've only ever seen one in my entire life, and it was at an anime convention. It wasn't even in Japan. Okay, I've been rambling long enough here. F-Zero GX is without a doubt in my mind the hardest GameCube game of them all, maybe the hardest racing game of them all, and it really is just one of the most difficult, challenging video games ever made. If you are looking for a game to test you in every sense, your reflexes, your knowledge, your memorization, it is F-Zero GX. Not another game on the GameCube will give you as much trouble as this game will. Like, some games are hard, even 100%ing some of these games are hard, like Mario Sunshine, but F-Zero GX, shit, this is just the hardest of them all.
That's it for today's video. Hope you enjoyed it. Hope it was what you're looking for, and wish you all a Merry Christmas. That's today's code word. You made it to the end of the video. It's going to be a Christmas GameCube. See y'all later. Bye-bye.